Hello everyone, my name is Redbeard, and today I will be revisiting Gorbad Ironclaw with my updated thoughts on how his mechanics should work in Total War now that he has been officially announced. For those new to the channel, I had a video dedicated to him in my Greenskins Series I made over a year ago now, which I will link in the description top right. For the TLDR, you just need to know these lore beats. Gorbad was the bestest orc that ever lived, at least in an all-around sense. He was by far the best tactician by orc standards. He led the greatest war in history, conquering the Badlands, dwarf holds, and destroying half the Empire, resulting in the killing of the Emperor himself in Altdorf. Other orcs looked down on goblins, but Gorbad could wield all units from all greenskin cultures to their utmost effect, astoundingly in unison with only a modicum of infighting. His Wa brought everything in the roster to bear: orc, goblin, melee, missile, monster, artillery, goblin, makeshift machines, but his personal favorite was cavalry, specifically orc boy Biggins. In fact, the Biggins and boars of the Ironclaw tribe were bigger and arter than the standard versions. As far as the tabletop rules go, though, he was just able to upgrade any orc unit to a Biggin unit. For Gorbad Ironclaw himself, he's not quite the warrior as Grimgor or Gorfang, but he could 1v1 any other orc. But dueling is not necessarily why you bring Gorbad. With his Iron Claw, he can crush a heavily armored dwarf in one hand, but in the other hand, he wields Morglor the Mangler, a chain axe he uses much like a Doomseeker does to clear swaths of infantry. And of course he rides on his monstrous-sized warboar, Gnarla, whose flatulence may grant a self-AoE explosion, reducing leadership. With all that covered, I want to revisit my previous ideas for Ironclaw faction mechanics. In my last video, I suggested that perhaps Gorbad has a unique building that gives them the ability to recruit Ironclaw Biggins as a unique sub-race. I also suggested that perhaps Gorbad might be able to steal racial items such as runes from dwarves or rune fangs from the Empire, potentially through unique quests, but that's when I thought he was an FLC. Now he's a DLC. Perhaps for the items, that stealing mechanic holds fine, but for a DLC faction, I think we need something a little more unique for the Ironclaw Biggins sub-race. So what if we expand upon the tabletop rules for upgrading orcs to Biggins? It would work much like the Chaos Warband upgrades, but maybe it uses scrap as its currency. Gorbad's faction was well known for stripping lands clean of valuables. As a faction effect, he might gain plus 25% scrap from all battles. So at tier 1, you have all your standard orc boys and savage orcs. Then using scrap, you can upgrade any of those units to a standard Biggin, with all greenskins getting Biggin era boys, since Biggins could take bows in tabletop. Still inaccurate, but pack a big punch. I also think it makes sense to add a Biggin boar chariot while you're at it. Seeing as we got the goblins with swords and the orc boys with spears, I think these types of units could be free in a interim patch. But then we get into the Ironclaw Biggins sub-race at tier 3. Like Altharian's Mistwalkers, I think the only way to bring in Gorbad is with his sub-race, spoken of within his lore. There are essentially 4 to 6 units mentioned, or that can be gleaned, which you could get from upgrading standard Biggins. One unit could be a 16 entity, aspiring champion style unit, but it's Biggin champions with dual hand weapons for anti-infantry. Or, if they wanted to emulate Gorbad with Morglor, they could wield dual chain axes as a 32 entity unit like Doomseekers for the dwarves. Creative liberty could definitely be had with their weapons. The idea is just a smaller, more elite unit. The most important unit is to take those Ironclaw champions and put them on the biggest boars you can find. This monstrous cavalry unit might focus on anti-large instead to keep things varied and balanced, and this is the unit that would finally make boar boys cool. Though all the current boar boys we have would also need love. They are notoriously bad as gyrocopters were, and would need the same level of facelift. Whilst making the monstrous cavalry, it would make sense to throw in a monstrous boar chariot, and maybe give those guys the chain axes if we're going that way. Additionally, Gorbad was known to employ orc river raiders that would ambush human and halfling watercraft along the rivers of the Empire with flaming arrows to sink the ships, Perhaps these would be an upgrade to Big and Error boys, gaining flaming missiles, stock, and possibly even aquatic. Gorbad ended up killing the Emperor during the Siege of Altdorf by unleashing a half-dozen wizards, one of them making it to the palace. I do think all greenskin factions should get access to feral wyverns, though not just Gorbad. All the same, having wyverns in his sub-race makes sense, which makes me think of the Orc Wyvern Riders, a unit that got miniatures from the Man of War game. I've seen over a dozen mods recreate this unit since Warhammer 1 for Total War, with Orc, Savage Orc, or Black Orcs for Riders. Clearly there is a demand here. Whilst maybe they could be worked into Gorfang Rockgut as an FLC faction, but I think it makes a ton of sense to just make them part of the Ironclaw Sub-Race, albeit you would not be able to get them through upgrades. They would be a legendary unit, incredibly similar to the Knights of Torgaval, that being they are an Elite 3 entity unit limited to recruiting 1 per Tier 5 settlement, but additionally they could maybe drop payloads of squig bombs. It would be incredible if every race got 1 legendary unit at some point, even if for only one of its factions. I had previously hoped that Greenskins would get a champion-style DLC with Gorbad, Gorfang, Snitgit, and one of the forest goblins, Gnarla or Tinnet, as legendary lords. Since that is not quite how it's happening, Gorfang could be an FLC, and then we need a forest goblin-focused DLC at some point. Any war machine Snitgit could bring can be divvied out amongst the 2 remaining DLC, so where does that leave him? We might just not get him in Total War, but I also know Gorbad used many goblin inventions of war in his armies. I think he would see a lot of potential in Snitgit and his war machines. Whilst all factions might get the Goblin Spearchucker or the Big Gork, perhaps Gorbad has a quest to unlock Snitgit as some sort of pseudo-legendary character. The Speshul Destroya might just be a mount unique to him, but could do well as a standalone unit. Essentially, it would be like if a pump wagon and an iron demon had a baby. A rickety single entity pushed by a troll, operated by goblins, mounted with a rock lobber, and on top of all that, has 2 wrecking balls swinging in the front. What a fun unit that would be. That should cover campaign mechanics, and I already discussed unit predictions in my overall Khorne DLC video, check top right. Also, Colossal Squig was more or less confirmed. Hell yeah. Gobla and Manglers as well, please. But I want to reiterate that for a battle mechanic, I think Gorbad should have Battle Harmony, which would be ripped straight from Cathay. Instead of Yin and Yang, it would be Gork and Mork. Gork for orcs and Mork for goblins. If a goblin stands near an orc, both units will receive buffs. Gorbad's unique Wah ability could double the effects of this Battle Harmony. As I've said before, his home is the Iron Rock, but this doesn't make sense if Gorfang is moving in next door, at the Black Crag. Fort Sol might work with Gelt gone, but I think the most sensible thing is to put him in Cathay, or Ind, if they are expanding there in this update. Perhaps like Gelt, he has the option to move home, or has a dual start like Altharion. Now I know what you all have been thinking, but Redbeard, what about Gorbad's mechanics discussed in the latest table discussion? So the working title for this mechanic is De Plan, and as they say it involves experimenting with different units for unique buffs. The example given is bringing goblins will mean you can replenish ammunition. Whilst I enjoy this idea and can replace the battle harmony I was conceptualizing, these details are scant, and we will have to wait to see how it fleshes out. For a DLC race, though, this will not be enough without the Ironclaw Biggin Sub-Race I've previously detailed. Admittedly, I will be disappointed if we don't get the elite Ironclaw units detailed in his lore. Further, the art shown in the dev video is a direct copy of Gorbad's tabletop model. Whilst I love this model, I was hoping for gameplay's sake they would adhere to how his Mount Gnarla is described in lore. Tabletop Gnarla is a puny boar. In older art, Gnarla is depicted as monstrous. The lore says Gnarla is immensely large, and personally I believe that would be much more fitting. then Gorbad would fit riding along his elite, monstrous Ironclaw boar boys. For Skulltaker and Goldfig, I also am interested but not sold on their mechanics yet. Skulltaker should be able to teleport to challenge strong factions, then use those skulls in the Skull Forge to open portals to Khorne's realm. Adding skulls to his cloak is loreful, but as described, sounds like a snowbally and possibly dull mechanic. The changes they are adding to contracts for Goldfig sound promising. I do hope he can gain some unique magical items from this, like his tabletop rules, and of course I think we need unique Maneater variants for every race. Beat a race in battle, and the Maneaters in that army can warband style upgrade to a unique variant based on that race. As this is my first video back from a hiatus, I want to thank those who held on to their subscription. I will of course find a way to let you guys know if plans change for the channel. As of now, I need to prioritize making money to pay bills and take care of my health and such. When I hit 1,000 subs and can start making some money, I should be able to put out more videos. Until then, hiatuses may happen from time to time. So, to close, thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and more soon.